Hello, my name is Zahar Karetsky, and this is the Transitions Visions podcast, a podcast series about and for the sustainability transitions community. This time I talked to Marjory Wildcraft, the founder of the Grow Network in the US and globally. This is a movement for environmentally friendly, self-sufficient and decentralized small-scale food production. The food system is obviously one of the largest industries on the planet, with huge environmental and social impact. So I asked Marjory what kinds of challenges, current and looming, small-scale food production can help with, and who it is really for. Of course, there is some practical advice on your own self-grown food. Please enjoy, and don't forget to reach out on LinkedIn for any feedback or ideas for future guests. So, Marjory Wildcraft, happy to have you here. You are expert on sustainable living and the founder of the Grow Network. And I saw online that it's a movement of people who are stopping the destruction of Earth via homegrown food. So this is kind of what I'd like to ask you about today. Not only about the value of self-sufficiency, but also about the movement that you have started. And what could be done further for transformation of our societies or communities towards a more environmentally friendly agricultural practices. So maybe could you start off a bit with a brief introduction of yourself and the Grow Network?
Yeah, sure. So here in the Americas, I'm known as the female leader of the survival and preparedness space. Many people believe that we are in tremendous change, and we all experienced it with the COVID experience. How quickly, grocery stores can be emptied and life can change. So more and more people are wanting to become more self-reliant. I've been working on this for a long time, and so I've developed a lot of resources. One of them is a free webinar on how to grow a whole bunch of food in a backyard-sized space, even if you're older and have no experience, and maybe if you're out of shape. That's at backyardfoodproduction.com. God, don't you love that URL? It's just really to help people prepare, because we are in a time of tremendous change. I don't know what you're seeing on your side of the ocean, but over here, there's a lot of people going, oh my God, Europe looks like they want to go to war with Russia. We're well on the way to inflation. You've been having what we call a war on farmers, just like we have too. I mean, the Dutch, farmers don't drive the tractors into town and spray manure just for the fun of it. That's because their backs were up against the wall. And so there's a lot of problems. Food inflation, food availability, wartime. Yep. There's a lot of stresses that are coming down on the average person. And so these skills are things that I have been learning and practicing and using and teaching for decades now. And I have to say, they're very simple, and it's extremely enjoyable. It's really wonderful to do. So I've built a whole organization around it.
Yeah, the Grow Network. So maybe a few words. So this is kind of an activist network, or is it just people who are interested and they join up in this network?
Well, I would say that growing your own food is the ultimate activism. Most of our people would not say they're activists. We do have some people that chain themselves to the tree to stop the bulldozer, but most of us are just people that want to eat healthy food and want to have food security. We're interested in our children being healthy. We're interested in, we recognize that there are problems with governments around the planet, and we can't rely on them. Actually, a lot of people would say that growing your own food is a revolutionary act.
Right. Yeah.
So we are revolutionists and activists, but it's more about just doing the right thing. Our tagline is stopping the destruction of the earth via homegrown food is because commercial agriculture is one of the most destructive forces on the planet. People
Right.
don't realize with all the chemicals they use and the loss in soil. We lose so many inches of soil every season just due to the practices they have. Um, here in the Americas, we have huge areas off the coast of the oceans from the chemical pollutants that drained out of the soils through the rivers. So, and by growing your own food, like I can't stop that, right? I can't stop commercial agriculture, but I can grow my own food and stop buying that. And that's what I
Yeah.
can do.
Yeah. So you really focus on this empowerment of producers of food, and many activists are actually doing more focusing on the consumer behavior. So yeah, so we have to eat local, we have to reduce waste and so on. But you're more sort of emphasizing on the empowerment of the producers. Is that a special value do you see in that?
Yeah. And I'm asking people themselves to become producers, not just yes, I buy from local farmers and yes, I encourage local, but there's nothing more local than your backyard or even your living room. Like you can grow a lot in an apartment or a condominium.
Yeah. Can you say a bit more about how food self-sufficiency, small-scale food self-sufficiency can, in your eyes, contribute to a larger transformation of the food system? Because you mentioned the commercial problems with the commercial agriculture.
There's quite a few ways that it helps and is absolutely necessary. One of them, excuse me there, the one of the most fundamental themes are genetics. And people don't think about this. In the 1990s, the United States Department of Agriculture did a study, and they compared gardening catalogs from 1890 over a 100-year period. And they said how many varieties were available in 1890 and how many varieties were available in 1990. And it's tremendous. I mean, it's like, I forget what the exact number, 85% loss. And that's because, those lettuces or those tomatoes or those cabbages, people used to do it in their backyard and save the seed and pass it on to their children and their grandchildren. And those varieties were developed just for that particular area. Well, now we have the centralized, commercialized version of agriculture. And they here in the Americas, we only have basically 2 varieties of corn that they grow commercially, which is a huge vulnerability for one. Hey, let's talk about the Irish potato family. And you want to talk about a vulnerability of being dependent on one crop. That's certainly an example of it. So genetics is really, really important. The other thing is your average backyard producer, well, first of all, you're not using much petrol or any fuel, right? You're not using much packaging. It's not being transported anywhere. You're just going out your back door and pulling off some veg, You're not using any petroleum. Most backyard producers don't use any chemicals. They're doing it all organically and naturally, which is what I teach. And their water reduction, I saw a study recently that backyard producers use about 86% less water than commercial producers. So it's just a much more efficient way. And the food is fresh. Like you can't get any fresher than picking it off the moment before you eat it, right? And that's when it has the most nutrients and the most vitality and the most enzymes and the most life. So for you as an individual, growing your own food is way healthier than buying anything. Yeah.
So you and the Grow Network would like to see this movement expand. You would like to see more people embracing self-sufficient food production, home food production. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's almost kind of a joke, the homegrown food on every table, and everybody goes, oh, that's, I said, no, it's going to happen one way or the other. Like there is going to be homegrown food or you're not going to be eating because the existing systems are imploding. They're hugely inefficient. They're toxic. they're not going. This is an anomaly in history. We are going to go back to where at least 70% of the people are producing some part of their own food themselves, and that's that's the way it's going to be. So the homegrown food on every table, in some way, is kind of a joke, because whether I do anything about it or not, that is going to happen. So I figure it's best to embrace change than it is to have it forced upon you. So
yeah. So yeah, hearing you say this, you could take it in both ways. You can take it in a very apocalyptic way, but you could also take it in a very inspiring, empowering way. So yeah, we could just make our own food, and our neighbors can do it, and our communities can do it. And I wonder,
well, it's so much more wonderful when you do that. When you grow your own and when you're sharing. There's always such an abundance you can give away and share, and you're right, community. It's all about community. Yeah.
Yeah, but I suppose there is some sort of threshold that you cannot then go beyond that, right? So with self-grown food.
Well, that's why you need community. So I often talk a lot about how to build community. I recommend that if you're growing half of your own food, and I'll give you a pitch for that website again. I know I'm a horrible promoting American, but backyardfoodproduction.com, it's free. Growing half, it only will take you about a half an hour to an hour a day at the most. And it's so empowering. And to be able to produce all is kind of a myth. It's really hard to produce all of your own food. And that's why it's really great to have community, right? I might be really, really good at growing squashes, and you're really good at growing tomatoes, and we can trade, right? We can share. People ask me, hey, Marjory, do you keep bees? And I say, I have something better than bees. And they go, what's that? And I say, I have a neighbor who keeps bees.
Nice. In terms of scaling up these practices in like community level, or maybe even regional, like more broader than communities, do you see what kind of barriers prevent these from happening from your perspective?
Right now, I see the biggest barrier as being the programming. If you look at every movie that's come out in the last 50 years, they show a farmer as being somebody who's dumb or stupid, or the only people that they show growing food is migrant workers or people who are desperate. Nothing could be further from the truth, actually. Most people who are growing their own food are actually fairly wealthy, and they do it because they enjoy it tremendously. So, and there's a lot of programming. I believe it's intentional to have you not produce your own food, because if you have some degree of self-reliance, then you are not as subject to control. So, I think the biggest barrier is the belief structures that most people have.
Right.
This is something, if you think about it, your great-grandparents did this, all of your ancestors did this. Most of them could not read. They certainly didn't have Google. I mean, it's actually fairly simple and easy to do. So, yeah.
But I'm still kind of wondering, because there are obviously benefits of mass scale production of food that we currently have with all its problems. And do you see a kind of, well, you said that in the near future, we might all have to resort to self-grown food. In a worst case scenario, in a good case scenario. But do you see this kind of balance of, like, we have this commercial food production with its benefit because it can feed a lot of people, and as opposed to self-grown food, decentralized grown food?
I'll give you an example. It may still be what you would call small scale, but what I think is a really good model that I've seen effectively used in historical times is everybody grows a little bit. So everybody's got a kitchen garden. Maybe they got some chickens. They've got a little bit going on. Some crops actually are much, much easier to do collectively. So often the calorie crops, so potatoes and corn and, your staples. And so when I was living in Texas, what I used to organize was everybody kind of had their own small stuff going on at home. And then someone with some land, we would plant crops together. And things like corn, for example, you need many hands for a short period of time. So when you're preparing the soil and you're planting, you need a lot of people there to do the work. And then it kind of calms down, like you just basically have some irrigation and somebody to watch it. And then you need people, many hands to come in maybe in a month or two and go through and do some weeding. And then you don't need much, right? And then meanwhile, somebody's still again doing a little fertilizing and watering. And then at the end, you need many hands for the harvest, right? And that's the traditional thing for potatoes, corn, those beans, those kind of what we call staple crops. And that's a very, very effective model that I've used and I've seen used by communities in other ways. We've even done it with chickens. Like we processing the chickens was something that we all needed to be there at one time for, but for most of the work, it was just a small amount of the work. So I see that as a viable model. Large scale agriculture, for sure. I think that there is some place in that, but not these 10,000 acre mega farms that are all just chemical.
Yeah. And do your ideas resonate with the movement, how it's called, downshifting? That's one, or maybe degrowth is another one that's kind of our floating around, or not really.
I hadn't heard those terms before.
Okay, yeah. Maybe it's a European, a Dutch thing.
This movement has to do with being healthy and being human.
Right.
I'm 62 years old and I train in jiu-jitsu and I regularly compete and sometimes I win and I'm fighting with girls who are 30 years 40 years younger than me. And they're like, how can you be doing that? How can you be so strong and so flexible at your age? And I'm like, because I've been homesteading and outdoors and eating extremely high quality food for a good chunk of my life. And I am actually what a normal human being should be.
Nice.
So you downshift, downsize, whatever. It's what you need to be. I'll tell you one other quick story. I regularly host big online summits where I get a lot of really famous people who are into permaculture or growing food or whatever. And one year I had this guy, his name is Dave Asprey, as the headline speaker. Now, Dave is not he's a guy who's known for being really into longevity. And he's a very, very wealthy man. He has a podcast. And on his podcast, he's often talking about nootropics and cryogenics and all this really high-tech stuff, stem cell therapy and all this really high-tech stuff to lengthen your age. Longevity is especially as you get older, it gets more interesting, right? And a lot of people would say, well, Marjory, why would a guy like that be on a summit for backyard food production? And it's because Dave himself has a 15-acre homestead where he has his own food supply. I'm pretty sure he doesn't do the work himself. But almost every centenarian, so that's somebody who's lived more than 100 years old, that's healthy and vibrant and clear the way you want to be when you're 100 years old, they either had access to or they grew their own food for most of their life. So homegrown food is a very important part of you being a healthy, vibrant, long-lived human being.
Yeah. I can totally see how this resonates with people in the US. We have a lot of room, I suppose. But I wonder in terms of like land access and also time constraints, like when you're working, when you're living in a city and when you have a full-time job, let's say, what are your kind of strategies for these kind of for getting into homesteading as you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot you can do. And I get that question because, 50% of our population is living in the cities. And so, first of all, some of the very simple things, we call them microgreens or sprouts, you can grow indoors. They only need a little tiny bit of sunlight to green up at the end. It's not a lot of calories, but it's a huge amount of nutrition and vitality. There's other things like herbs that you can grow in a windowsill. There's a lot of people coming out with very innovative planters now that you can grow all kinds of lettuces and tomatoes and kale and spinach and broccoli indoors. Some people are using grow lights. I really recommend as much natural sunlight as possible. Mushrooms. You can grow those in a closet. Unfortunately, one time I found out my son was doing that, and they were not the
good ones.
They were depends on your approach. I was like, wait a minute. I was like, oh, well, that's a good idea. We could grow mushrooms. I want to eat them. You want them for another reason. Anyway, quail. I set a girlfriend up a couple of years ago with, she has 10 quail in her living room, and they each lay a little quail egg. So she's getting about 10 quail eggs a day, which for her is a meal. I mean, it's equivalent to like a little over 3 chicken eggs, and a lot of nutrition in that. And they're not exactly songbirds, but it's not unpleasant. They're not really noisy. I've had people raising rabbits in their homes or apartments, and they grow the fodder for the rabbits in the house also. So, and then of course there's lots of the other strategies. There was a period in time when I didn't have my own homestead, and I was moving just kept renting. So I created a community garden. I found a place that had a vacant lot and just organized people, and we now have a community garden. I've also planted, and I do this pretty regularly even to this day, we call it guerrilla gardening, where you just go out and plant trees and plant food on land that's unused. So there's a lot of options. Yeah.
Yeah. In a country such as the Netherlands, let's say, I don't think that last advice may be too feasible, because there's no empty room. But the other ideas definitely resonate with me, because I know I have a friend in a smaller town next to in the Netherlands. He has a backyard, not a huge one, but he has a lot of chickens there, and fruit trees, and even some vegetables growing there. So it definitely is possible, I would say.
There are some websites here one is called Shared Earth, and I bet there are similar ones where you're at.
Absolutely,
where somebody who has a backyard, but they can't work it, maybe they're older or they're too busy or whatever, and they say, hey, if you want to work it, we can make some arrangement for sharing things.
Exactly.
So just like Uber and Airbnb found a way to connect people up with software to better utilize cars and empty bedrooms, we can do the same thing with space, with yard and ground.
Yeah, community gardens are also kind of a thing here in even in larger towns, cities. So there's definitely a way. I'm wondering, how do you respond to people who say that, well, this is mostly for, like, if you really want to living like this in a decentralized way and to do it in a consistent way, as you described, the way you're doing, so like growing very good quality food. Do you need to be in a way privileged, because commercial food production is cheaper and it's much more convenient to acquire?
I would say that growing food has always been something you can do. Now, yes, you can spend a lot of money for these containers or for that thing or this gadget or that tool, but a lot of it can just be done for free. I mean, you're using your hands to work directly with the earth. Here's one thing that I do is every other month, this is to build community, I host a plant and seed swap party. So I just found a local cafe, and I said, hey, can we use your space on Saturday morning from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m.? And I'm going to invite a bunch of people here, and they'll have plants and seeds, and we're going to swap, and people will probably buy a coffee or whatever. So the coffee shop owner is thrilled, like, yes, I need more business, right? And so every other month I host this party, and then I put it out, I print up flyers, or I put it on Facebook or do the different, get it out around the community. And then people show up and people bring all kinds of stuff. They bring seeds and plants. And this last one, people had a whole bunch of trees and, there was a whole bunch of stuff that was available. And there's often a bunch left over, and so I get to keep it, But when you start growing food, you find like a lot of people will, if you're going to grow tomatoes, often you'll grow the starts. You'll often grow 2 to 3 times as much because in case the first set die off for whatever reason. So there's often a lot of extra. Earth is very, very abundant. So, I mean, that's one way that you can do it for absolutely free and get free seeds and free plants and good friendships. It does not have to cost a lot of money at all.
Absolutely. And I am now reminded of these food banks. What people do is they bring the leftover food from the supermarkets that they will gonna throw away. But activists are collecting that food and delivering it to these food banks, and then just have a party basically at the end of the day, every day.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, do you see like room for large farms, commercial farms, and also policymakers sort of getting on board? And have you maybe considered approaching these two kinds of parties with, well, maybe you large farm, you policymakers could help us. Maybe you could adopt some of these practices in one way or another.
I have done my best to reach out and work with them. For one example is whenever you flush the toilet in an American city, they take the solids, they call them biosolids, and they compost them. And they're full of toxins. It's just because everything people flush down the toilet. And they're full of what we call PFAS, or forever chemicals, PFAS. They're polyfluoride chemicals. And it's just hugely, hugely toxic to human beings. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, tested 94 different municipalities, and 100% of them had these horrible chemicals in the thing. And we have developed a system with minerals and microbes that if they just did another 2 or 3 months of composting using this protocol, it would turn into beautiful, clean, completely healthy soil. And we just keep trying to approach them, and we so far have not had any success at all. I've also done a lot. I've tried reaching out to different groups with, the World Economic Forum, they have the 17 SDGs, the Sustainability Development Goals. And I'm like, look, backyard food production meets like 15 of the 17 goals. I've applied many, many times with their different challenges or different, and I've not made any headway. And I keep trying, but I have not, and I really have tried hard. I've been at this for 20 years, and so far we haven't been able to. They have some wonderful, looks like some wonderful initiatives, a plant of 1 million trees or whatever, but they. I don't know. Yeah. I would hope that we could have. We're going to have to make this work because we are reaching crisis levels on so many fronts. Yeah. So we are going to have to work together. Yeah.
In the beginning of our talk, you mentioned that the government is not helping, to put it mildly. I think you said that it's not helping at all. Could you expand a bit on that? And maybe do you see a value in some sort of support for policy, from regulation, subsidy, whatever, for small farmers, for self-sufficient growers?
Well, there's what I would call it a war on farmers, and it's very well known here. And I'm most familiar with America, so I'll talk about this. But so that the biosludge, which is what we affectionately call the soil that comes out of the municipalities, they know it's full of toxins, and they give it away to farmers, or they sell it to them for very, very cheaply. Now they have been going back to those same farmers, and they take a soil test and they said, oh, your soil has these chemicals in it, and they condemn the farm for the farmers. Right. And so a lot of people are looking at this as intentional entrapment and destruction of farms. Some other examples in Idaho last year. So we have had lots of wonderful rains. The reservoirs are full, lots of snowpack on the mountains, and they decided to shut off the water to 500,000 acres of potato farmers in Idaho. And ultimately, it's because they wanted to build a data center for Facebook, which needs massive amounts of water for cooling.
Of course, yes.
So, there's these struggles and the farmers generally do not win. Facebook and the big tech has so much more money for lobbying and so much more, control of the legal systems and the governmental systems that we don't really have. We've been fighting for years, of course, to not have glyphosate be used or to not have a lot of these GMOs done, but there's numerous medical studies that demonstrate that those things are toxic to humans. They cause cancer and they're dangerous, and yet we cannot get that out of the food supply. The EPA and the USDA and the FDA are all complicit in this. The EPA actually lists that sludge soil as organic, and it's even listed under OMRI, which is our organic materials standard, saying this is OMRI certified. So,
right. Protection from the overreach of corporate influence in from the policy side.
We call it the revolving door thing, where you might be a vice president with Monsanto one day, and then the next day you're a director with the Environmental Protection Agency, right? And they go back and forth and back and forth, and we see the same thing in our financial markets are completely manipulated and controlled. We see the regulators going back and forth to the big banks, So we live in a pretty insane world right now. And I'll go back to backyard food production, though. Fortunately, if you're in your garden and you're producing your own carrots, there is something very, very calming and soothing about that.
Another benefit. What are the biggest misconceptions people have about self-sufficiency?
A lot of people often think, Marjory Wildcraft, and she's inspired hundreds of thousands of backyard farmers, and they all think of vegetables. And honestly, the most efficient calories and nutrition to produce are animal products. So, for example, if you have a 100 square foot garden, which is going to take you about 200 square feet because of the paths and stuff. In let's say you have 2 growing seasons, you can produce about 60,000 calories in that. If you have a flock of backyard hens, 6 laying hens, which again, 200 square feet for the coop and the run, and maybe you let them run out in the yard every now and then, they'll produce about 1,500 eggs a year, and that's about 94,000 calories. So you're getting a lot more just from hens. If you have a small rabbitry with a buck and 3 breeding does, which again can easily fit into that 200 square foot space, you're going to get the equivalent. You get about 85 rabbits out of that, and that's about 230,000 calories. And actually, honestly, the rabbits and the chickens take less time than the garden. So the biggest myth people think about when they think about self-sufficiency and growing food, they're, we got to create a garden, and you do need to create a garden. But the animal products by far are way more efficient and productive.
Any other misconceptions about being self-sufficient in food that you had to?
One of the other big myths is that, here in the U.S., the guy, he's got his gun and he's got his family and he's going to head out into the wilderness, and you cannot do it on your own. The biggest myth is the lone survivor. You really, really need to have community. The guy with the gun, I usually say, hey, who is your daughter going to marry? First of all, you got to have community, right? You can't just have your whole family out there. Who do you celebrate birthdays with? What happens when your crop of potatoes gets destroyed and you need help, right? And so has some, we all need humans need community. In the very, very ancient times, we were tribes. And, really, bottom line is we're not that different from tribal peoples we're just modern peoples with different aspects of it, but we do fundamentally need other human beings. So one of the other big myths of self-sufficiency is doing it all on your own, and you can't. You really need community.
What are the lessons that you can share that you have learned from building this community?
One of the biggest lessons I've learned is most people are not going to do this until there's a crisis. So, I've been doing everything I can to encourage people to grow food and get ready, to shift over into this lifestyle. And there are, to my credit, we've got quite a big community that has rallied around that. But I have not reached the tens of millions. I've reached millions of people, but I haven't reached the tens of millions or hundreds of millions that I really feel is necessary. The more people that are growing food, the easier this transition is going to be. And make no doubt about it, we are in an amazing time of transition, and we are likely to see a loss of life this year that would be unthinkable. It is unthinkable, and that's here in the Americas. This is in the UK. We've got in the EU. There's just World War III. They're natural cycles. Like every 80 years or so, these things happen, and we're now primed for that. We have a trend globally going on of nationalism. You can see that reflected very easily in all the tariffs. We've got a trend everywhere of inflation, and you can see that very easily from every single government printing more and more and more money, and that's going to lead to inflation. We see a reduction in farming and food production pretty much everywhere on the planet. We are headed into, the last hard times like this was the Great Depression. And that is what we're headed into. And this year, 2025, will mark that we take a giant step in that direction. So the biggest thing that I've learned is people don't shift their lifestyle until they absolutely have to, and crisis. And that's why I've developed that thing for somebody who's like, easy, you can do this, right? Even if you don't know anything, you can do this. Even if you're old or you're out of shape, you could do this. The more people who can get going on this early, the easier this whole transition is going to be for everybody.
That would be a great conclusion, I would say, to our discussion. Thank you very much, Marjory. Hope the bleakest forecast doesn't come to life, but the lessons are there to learn. Yeah, you could just start.
I don't like to be. I don't like to be gloom and doom. But I'm a realist. And if you see what's going on in the world, you can't deny it. Exactly. And I know it's, you want to go back to work and, the sun rises and everything looks good. But if you're paying attention, you realize there are some tremendous changes going on. So anyway, I just want to offer those resources to everybody. And again, we're really, this is no longer a business. This is a mission. And if you go to backyardfoodproduction.com, there's that free webinar, and I'll condense 20 years of figuring out the fastest and easiest ways to grow food, and you can pick that up for free. And thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you and to talk to your community. If anybody wants to reach out to me, please do. I'm more than available. Marjory, that's Marjory with a Y, at thegrownetwork.org. Be more than happy to talk to you or help you in any way possible.